with the assistance of a special forces sniper, or with permission to use the CIA's paramilitary organization, bin Laden could have been dealt with easily by bumping him off. We had goons from the FBI. They were loyal to their boss. They were loyal to their organization. They didn't give a shit about America. The deputy of Alec, the station, could not have stopped the FBI from getting that information. So it all sounds to me like they made Tom Wilshire some kind of a scapegoat and tended to play along with it, which is perfectly in his character. Who knows what happened on 9/11 anymore? I thought I knew, and I was obdurant in refusing to consider that anything was wrong with the idea that it was conducted by the enemy itself alone, until I saw Building 7 collapse.
Hello everyone, that was the voice of today's guest, Dr. Michael Scheuer. As a CIA intelligence officer, Dr. Scheuer ran the agency's Osama bin Laden tracking unit, known as Alec Station, from 1996 to 99. In the years after the September 11th attacks, Dr. Scheuer became famous for many of his views on US foreign policy and criticised both the Clinton and Bush regimes for failing to assassinate bin Laden when they had the chance. This interview was shocking to both myself and my co-host Adam Fitzgerald, as Dr. Scheuer entertains the possibility that the 9/11 attacks were plotted from within the US government, an inside job. He rejects, however, the common position that the CIA's Alec Station played a pivotal role in this by withholding information on the hijackers from the FBI. Neither Adam nor myself currently know what to make of this. We started out by asking Dr. Scheuer about his background and how he ended up joining the agency.
I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and I went to school there, and I got a bachelor's degree at Canisius College and an MA at Niagara University, both of which are Catholic colleges. And I worked until until I was 29, either for the New York State Park Commission, in one or another of their parks, mowing lawns and cutting trees and doing that kind of thing. And then I worked for 6 or 8 years for Union Carbide Company and was involved in logistics there, moving things from one place to another on trucks or payloaders.
What type of household was it? Was it a religious household, a political household? How did you grow up your parents?
I guess it was just kind of an average. My father was a policeman. My mom was a housekeeper. Stayed home with the children. I had 2 sisters. I think it's just a kind of a working blue collar middle class life.
And when did you decide to become employed by CIA? How did this interest come about?
Well, I was working on my PhD, and I belonged to the American Historical Association, and they used to publish a monthly digest of their events, but also at the end of it was a listing of openings for historians. And it was at the time when Mr. Reagan was beefing up the agency, and they, for the first time in any advertisement I saw, they included historians as someone they were looking for. So I applied and received an offer to work there, or else I'd be just retiring now from Union Carbide, I guess.
When did you?
It wasn't a lifelong dream. Buffalo at that time was shattered economically, and there were just very, very few jobs, teaching or any other kind of work. And I was lucky enough to get in with Union Carbide and held a job there for best part of a decade. And I was going to take any job that came along. I wanted to stay at home in Western New York, but I couldn't do it. So I came to Washington.
Did you always have an interest in Middle East politics, or was this something that grew on you later? No,
never. I studied American history, and I ended up getting my PhD from the University of Manitoba in Canada, in Winnipeg, on what they used to call the North Atlantic Triangle, Canada, United States, and Great Britain.
Did and when you became employed by CIA, did they you worked in the what type of divisions did you work in?
I worked for about a year and a half in the analytic division there, and I had an opportunity to move over into another analytic division, and I worked on Afghanistan. And from there, I moved into the Directorate of Operations, where I spent the rest of my career. I was, just very fortunate. I had to take a course in British colonial military operations, and Afghanistan was one of them. So I fit right in, and for my sins, I spent the rest of my career one way or another working on Afghanistan.
Was it a choice that was easy for you, or was it laid in your lap?
No, I in fact, I got a lot of opposition I worked in the European division, and I got a lot of opposition from them about going, but I wanted to go. I wanted to do it. Somebody told me one time at the CIA, ride to the sound of the guns. And I spent the rest of my career doing that kind of thing. So, and I had a good career, and I resigned not very reluctantly. The time was right, but sadly, I would say.
You wrote in the book, Pure Hubris, the following: one of the greatest dangers for Americans in deciding how to confront the Islamist threat lies in continuing to believe at the urging of senior U.S. leaders that Muslims hate and attack us for what we are and think rather than for what we do. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, it's a funny business. I was trained in the historical method, if you will, by Jesuits when they were still amongst the best teachers and thinkers in the world, and it was before they turned into the kind of airy-fairy group they are at the moment. And I always paid a lot of attention in the area of terrorism to open source material because it tells you what they're thinking. And certainly Osama bin Laden, had he been an American politician, would have been praised for staying on message and being very clear on what he intended. And I think you can go through the corpus of his materials, which are quite extensive, and find out what he's talking about at all times is what we're doing and not who we are. He's very clear that what we're doing in this country in terms of social mores or behavior would have no part in the Muslim world. But he wasn't fighting for those kinds of things. He was fighting because we had military people in the Holy Land in Saudi Arabia. We more or less controlled the price of oil for a long time in the kingdom and thereby cut back its revenue. We supported a string of dictators across the Arab world and still do, although there's fewer of them now. And we also refused to take on, with our foreign policy, take on the Indians or the Chinese for their torture of Muslims in Xinjiang and parts of India. So he was very clear, very outspoken about what he wanted to articulate too, about what he was saying. But in Washington, if something's not stamped secret or top secret, people are not too much interested in him. I wrote 4 books on Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, and none of them had any intelligence in it in terms of classified material. It was all open source. It was all from what bin Laden and his lieutenants said or other people said about them. So if you're not going to listen to your enemy about what his intentions are in fighting, then you're never going to know what kind of war you're going to fight until you get there, and most times you lose. Look at Vietnam. But in terms of Afghanistan, we knew exactly what kind of war they were going to fight after they attacked us. It was too hard to keep trying to get us in the United States. It was a very long way from Afghanistan and had a lot of intricacies in getting into the country and then finding nooks in which to hide and then be able to operate from them. So they wanted, what bin Laden said was, we will sucker you into, he didn't use the word sucker, but that's what he meant. We'll sucker you into coming to our land and then we'll take care of the problem. And that's exactly what happened.
This resonated with me a bit, Mr. Scheuer, because I too, I study true crime and the psychology of criminals, in that the jihadist is a very unique mindset, in that unlike La Cosa Nostra or Mexican cartels, or apolitical dissidents, the jihadist will actually tell you why they're attacking you and tell you at some points what they are attacking at. It's almost as if they're telling you why they're doing it because they're proud to tell you, or as if they're wanting to tell you why. And there seems to be this huge disconnect between U.S. officials and the Pentagon, in that they think that this is an intricate, elaborate, and very covert ideology. It's very, I think it's very upfront. They're telling you why they're attacking you. And I think the great point here is that after the 93 bombing, Ramzi Youssef was allowed to speak before his sentencing, and he gave an hour's speech. And during it, he said why he attacked why he built the bomb and blew it up in the World Trade Center.
And
And
I think he said something about
policy.
if he had another $25,000, he would have brought the building down.
Yes, he would have brought the buildings down.
Yeah.
And I think that, when I read Imperial Hubris, I resonated with that, because I said, yes, that's exactly why. But yet there's this huge confusion as to why they're attacking. No, there isn't, because they're straight up and very forward.
They're very forward. It's part of it's because of the religious motivation. I think they think they're doing God's work, and I guess if you think that, you're proud of being able to push along the agenda of their Lord. I also think that we're dreadfully ignorant of foreigners and of foreign history, of anything before Vietnam, for example. You encounter very senior people who don't know anything really. When I was a young officer, I spoke to the Senate Select Committee on intelligence, and we had a senior senator from the Midwest who had been a very strong supporter of helping the Afghans against the Red Army, who asked me, he said, Mr. Scheuer, do you mean that after all we've spent on this war in support of these people to make them the winners, or help them to be the winners, that there's going to be a Muslim government in Kabul if they win? And before I could say a word, the deputy director of CIA was sitting there, and he jumped in and took it over, because I think he was worried about what I was going to say. And he just said, well, it's not certain yet, sir, but it very much looks like that. But that's after we had been there for 8 years. The depth of ignorance amongst our leaders is almost insurmountable. It's a function, of course, of our education system having gone into the dumpster, but it's also a function of, if they're going to attack women's rights, and if they're going to attack, it's an easy way to get us into a war without any kind of sensical explanation of why. They run up the flag and they start talking about our civil liberties. And of course, the only thing the war against Al-Qaeda did was to lessen our civil liberties.
Did you, I agree with this synopsis. And it's interesting because in the very early day, just after the war, the CIA became interested in the activities of bin Laden and his group Al-Qaeda when he relocated to Sudan. Exactly when did the CIA become interested in bin Laden?
Well, for a long time, we were, because of a influence I think you can imagine, the counterterrorism operations were focused on Lebanese Hezbollah, the Iranians' ally and the Israelis' enemy. And that only wore away a little bit because we did not seem like we were waging war against a religion, according to the leaders of the CIA under Clinton, and the FBI the same way. That we had to look for another person, and so we hooked on to Osama bin Laden. We had known him. Not we, the agency, but the people that worked on Afghanistan had known him as a person who had come at a young age into Afghanistan from the wealthiest family in Saudi Arabia, except for the royal family, and had supplied arms for the Mujahideen, had fought alongside of them, had a reputation for bravery, and had a reputation for providing aid for the families of fighters who were killed or who were actually away in the field fighting. It was pretty much, it was a very popular story in the Arab world and in the Asian world. That is, in mostly media products that weren't in English. And so we never needed to get in touch with Osama bin Laden at that time when we were well positioned to, because he was essentially doing God's work at that time. He was trying to kill enough Soviets to drive them out and to bleed them. We had a point during the Afghan war, which we supported, where the Soviets were spending some of their smaller and smaller hoard of gold on Canadian wheat, and then sending a substantial part of it to Afghanistan to feed their armies and the people there. So we could just turn a blind eye on bin Laden. And I think bin Laden would have never been a problem for us, except that after the war was over, when many in the agency urged the Americans to get out, the Afghans had been there for 2 millennia or more, had ruled themselves, and they hate central government. We knew that. That was why the British were always fighting, is because they tried to establish a semi-democratic British-influenced government in Kabul. Get out. Let the Afghans take care of themselves. But no, we sent lawyers and we sent NGOs and we sent teachers and we sent women's rights people, and the people who got into command in Kabul were the people who had opposed the Soviets rhetorically, from India, from Italy, from France, and the only people who didn't get any sense of the victory, any spoils of the victory, were the people who were on the side of the people, if you will. And there's a huge misunderstanding on Afghanistan, because the heroes of the CIA in that case were the logistical people. They made sure that the weapons that we secured around the world got to the Afghans when they needed them, in the amounts they needed them, and in working condition. Otherwise, there was some good reporting on the area. I worked on it from, 86 until 1991 full time. And the Afghans are a remarkable people in many ways. They're very brave. If you win their friendship, they're your friends forever. They also can be the biggest liars and deceivers. They're brutal at times, but they're their own people, more than probably anybody else on earth. One of the tools we used to get somebody to do something they didn't want to do was to offer them a green card. And the Afghans would, whenever you tried that, the Afghans would look at you and say, "What are you talking about? I'm from Afghanistan. Why would I want to go to the United States?" And so it was a mistake to stay there and try to bring Monticello on the Kabul River for the Afghans. All it did was make them hate us. And what did we do when we went back after 9/11? Same damn thing.
I just want to follow up on that, just get your thoughts on, there's an online conspiracy. When the CIA was running the Operation Cyclone, that somehow that bin Laden was involved in this operation, that he received training and funding or finances. Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri wrote a book called Knights Under the Prophet's Banner, where he basically stated that at no point did bin Laden ever receive direct funding from the CIA or the agency that was made up by the West. Is that true, or is this just basically unfounded?
Well, the first thing you do when you start an operation at a particular target or a particular group is to make sure you know everything or you're aware of everything you hold in terms of documents and records. And we went through enormous amounts of records, with some sophisticated programming, and by just page by page by eye, and found nothing. I never saw anything that said any of our weapons were directed toward Osama bin Laden. Now, we were not the distributors of those weapons. We worked through the Pakistani intelligence service, the ISID, and also the Pakistani army. So who they gave those to, we didn't interfere in for the most part until Clinton came into power. And then he and his wife, you can't give guns to people who are not involved in the idea of women's rights and women's welfare as they are in the United States. So they basically came down to a deal on delivering arms. And the Pakistanis continued to arm the people that fought. And we were ordered to give weapons to a portion of the weapons to the people who talked about opposing the communists and the Soviets in Afghanistan, but really sold dope, spoke English, wore suits, and then would sell the guns we gave to them. So it became kind of a political charade about putting weapons into the hands of people if they won, would be more like us. They never fought. They just drugged people up and exported heroin to the United States and other places. But that's the way they play politics in the United States.
Did the CIA, after the war, did the CIA think that bin Laden would be a danger or a threat to the United States?
I can't remember that being the case until until I went to the Counterterrorism Center in either 91 or 92 as the chief of a group that was called, I think it was called Islamic extremists at the time. We couldn't call them terrorists anymore. And I think that's rightfully, they're insurgents more than anything else. But we had everybody mixed together. And there were Algerians and there were people out of the Balkans and Albania and other places like that up there. And we had terrorists in the Philippines. And that whole conglomeration of Islamists around the world fell into our unit. Then there was a shuffle of management in the agency, and they wanted to set up a special organization that would go after a major terrorist group and see if we could, knock it down. And initially, everybody wanted to do Hezbollah, but it needed the president's approval, and that didn't come. No war on religious organizations. And so we focused on bin Laden. I think you said earlier, just about the time he went to the Sudan. But that turned into a mockery of covert operations because again, there's everybody in the Congress who will defend foreigners before Americans. I'll give you one example. Bin Laden had an extensive agricultural operation going in eastern Sudan. The Sudanese government owed him money, and they paid him instead with land, and he was happy to have it. He loved to farm, and they were good at it. And so he had a great deal of mechanical machinery there, and we had arranged an operation that would have been able to sabotage that material. So if it was run, it would break up. Its engine they would have a horrible time with it, and it would slow down their ability to earn money via agriculture, and it also would put a big hole in bin Laden's pocketbook. We had to take it to the Congress for their approval, and we talked to a subcommittee of the Committee on Intelligence in the House of Representatives. And they said no, because if we ruined that equipment, it would put local Sudanese people who worked for bin Laden out of work. And shortly after that, of course, they attacked Kenya and Tanzania. So it's always a humorous thing to me about how little anybody in the Congress really cares about defending Americans, at least in my experience, which ended in 2004. But it seems to me, if anything, it's gotten worse since then.
Let's talk about Sudan, because when bin Laden moved to the Sudan, it's and correct me if I'm wrong, it's noted that the CIA began surveillance at his house in the Khartoum, and that there was one very legendary CIA officer, you're familiar with, Billy Waugh, who had become who evaluated bin Laden and his security detail, and even outlined a plan because he would actually jog in the morning and see bin Laden, the security detail, go to the mosque in the morning and stuff, and that he became familiar with them, thinking he's a fitness guru or something. Was there any plans to detain or rendition bin Laden or kill him? And if so, were those plans? Why weren't those plans approved?
Well, because what if we killed him? Was always the answer. My officers, or at least the officers who worked for me, and with us in the field, provided Mr. Clinton 10 different opportunities between 1997 and 2000, and in 1997 and 1999, 10 opportunities to either kill Osama bin Laden using the military, or to capture him and take him to a place where people would probably never hear of him again. The head of the Joint Chiefs at the time wanted no part of any military operation against bin Laden because Al-Qaeda, he said, wasn't a threat. They practiced on gym equipment in the desert, and why should we ever take them as a threat? And as far as the senior part of the CIA is, when you have an operation that they've asked you to put together, and if it's not 100%, they start to get sweaty. And if it's like 60-40, 50-50, they almost always say no. And the reason they say no is not the question, what would the American people think if we tried it and it didn't work? But what would the New York Times and the Washington Post think if we tried it and it didn't work? And then they would be all over us. They never ask the question, how many Americans die if we don't at least give it a go? That at least is my experience on 10 different occasions when we had an opportunity. We had an opportunity to take him, to kidnap him and get him out of Afghanistan to a country which was eager to have him removed from the scene, and from which you could all but guarantee that he would never be heard of again. And the plan was dropped because the FBI said, well, why should we be helping you if we're not going to get credit? We're not going to get the skin. We're not going to get the trophy. And that ended that. Of course, the FBI is an organization that is a minimally intelligent organization, and one that is interested only in the plaudits it can win for themselves individually and for the organization, not particularly in the United States. And I think we've seen that in spades under Trump, or while Trump was in there.
Did you recognize the danger of bin Laden at a very early stage in Sudan, or
I took him very seriously, sir, on on the basis of following what he said about what he was fighting for, why he was fighting for it, and what actions he was going to take. And on all scores, in his voluminous rhetoric, it was 70% or more. It dwarfed any American politician. And on the positive side, if he said it, he was going to do it, or he was going to at least try to do it. Mm. And seriously, I was on the scene and watched men armed with AK-47s and other materials of the Korean War vintage drive the Red Army out of Afghanistan with no air cover, with no artillery to speak of, no armor, against a Red Army that played only by its own rules, not by world rules for just war or something like that. They were brutal, they were murderous, and they still drove them out. So not to take someone who had won the affections and allegiance of the Afghans who beat the Soviets, and a man who also spoke his mind and made sure he followed up and did what he said he was going to do. I thought, foolishly maybe, but I thought it was not a mistake. In many ways, he thought like a Jesuit, very logically, very orderly thinker, and in his own way, an articulate and times an eloquent man. Always dealing with real problems, not airy-fairy problems.
Was there any connection inside Al-Qaeda up to this point? Was there any informants working with you that had connections to Al-Qaeda in the Sudan, or was it totally, or were there none?
No, there was some. We got some reporting out of Sudan, not much. We followed him basically there on the basis of open source material. Our people were able to collect some intelligence there. But again, until bin Laden became a problem, a public problem for the United States, the emphasis inside the agency was Hezbollah's activities in the Sudan. It was only after maybe the Kenya attacks that the big tough boys who were in Sudan at the time said, oh, we knew all about them and we were going to take care of them and this and that. And it wasn't true. They talked about getting them, but their job as assigned by headquarters was Hezbollah. I don't know if it was headquarters in Tel Aviv or headquarters in Washington, but that's what it was.
Was there any signals intelligence operations on bin Laden in the Sudan? Because it's reported that the NSA were listening to the satellite phones of bin Laden in the Sudan.
I think you can say, as a general rule, NSA listens to most anything you can imagine being out there. The problem was getting NSA to share it with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
They go back and they tell you, here's the 1947 some kind of an act that gave them in charge of all of SIGINT. And what you needed in terrorism, not just on bin Laden, but on all of the groups that were a threat to the United States, what you needed was the verbatim discussion between A and B and C or X and Y. What did they say? How did they say it? And what was the context of the discussion? And all you would get from NSA was summaries. I think they looked on terrorism as part of the agency, looked on it as a sideline issue. Russia was the problem, or China was the problem, or keeping the current president in power was the problem. So it's I would be surprised if there wasn't SIGINT. There's things I'm still bound by my oath of office. I can't tell you.
Right.
It was easier in Afghanistan because we had been there since 1979, 1980. We knew a lot of people. We had a lot of people who worked for us. And we were able to gather significant human intelligence because of our background there. And we had a number of officers who worked on that war for its entirety, from 79 until I think 1991 or 2, something like that. And they spoke the language, or one of those languages at least, and they knew the people, and we were able to put up a very strong collection operation inside of Afghanistan within at most a month or month and a quarter after Brother Osama went back there. He had people in there before, but the bulk of his important leaders came with him from the Sudan. And so we had a steady flow of good intelligence. The chief of station in Pakistan was an outstanding officer, and he worked his people hard. He put them in danger, and they collected the information that gave Mr. Clinton 10 opportunities to capture or kill him.
Why did the Clinton administration reject all these proposals?
Well, they say that the president actually went a couple of times to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and said, "Why don't you use your ninjas to go after these guys?"
I've heard this.
And I told you previously that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs had no time for bin Laden. None of my resources are going to go after them. So we had to plan these things ourselves. And the point to make is, with the assistance of a special forces sniper, or with permission to use the CIA's paramilitary organization, bin Laden could have been dealt with easily by bumping him off. But American presidents are so afraid of being chastised by the world for killing a threat to America that they would rather send young men and women to die in a war to remove that person, instead of taking the easy way out. If it is not patent insanity for a country to recognize a leader so powerful or so influential that he may well be able to direct some kind of activity against the continental United States, if they think it's better to fight a war against him than to send a team responsible for his elimination, I find that unconscionable, unreasonable, idiotic. Look at what we lost in Iraq because we wouldn't send somebody to kill Saddam. Look at what we'd have lost in opening the way for Islamism in North Africa by either leaving Gaddafi alone, who had probably the most prosperous Arab country in the world, and certainly he was helping us more than he ever had before. And now North Africa is topsy-turvy and certainly an open ground for the growth of a new generation of Islamists. So I've always been the one that believes that force is the last result or last response, but the last response that protects you from sending your military, your youngsters to war with a set of generals who haven't won anything since 1945 is, to me, you avoid that is to the greatest extent possible.
96 was a very big year. My question for you is that how did the CIA become aware of this Al-Qaeda communications hub in Sana'a, Yemen at this time?
Well, we always knew that they were in Yemen. Bin Laden had a very close personal tie to one of the tribes in Yemen, because I think his father came from Yemen. Mm-hmm. And Yemen had been a place where we would naturally collect intelligence. So we had a long-standing ability to do that because of the oil routes through there, because it's close to Iran and close to Saudi Arabia. So that's one of the reasons we were able to collect some very useful intelligence out of Yemen.
The house was owned by a person named Ahmed al-Hada, who's an associate of bin Laden. And the NSA had become aware of this home and were monitoring the phone lines of this home. And it's asserted through the FBI that there was an individual by the name of Khalid Fawaz who had delivered a phone from New York to Afghanistan through Virginia to Afghanistan, and that this satellite phone went to bin Laden in Tora Bora. Incidentally enough, when the FBI found out, they contacted the NSA to try and monitor this phone line to see where it went, but they had no idea it went to bin Laden. And incidentally enough, the phone was decrypted, so it was easy for the NSA to crack the phone and listen to the phone calls. And through here, they became aware of the number in the house in Yemen. That information was passed on to you, or
No, I've never heard that story before.
Really?
Yeah. The FBI doesn't share anything with anyone, sir. They steal from you. I had FBI agents take boxes of CIA cables, communications out of the agency and over to their headquarters. I would report it to my chief, the head of the Counterterrorism Center. He would report it to Tenet, who was the chief of the CIA at the time, and they both came back and said, "You solved the problem, Mike." And so that went on and on and on, because there's no way for me to stop the FBI from doing anything unless I have support from a little bit higher command than I represent. But they could have, well, the one thing I found out in running the operation, and I ran it from late 95 until 99, was that just because I was in charge didn't mean I knew everything that was going on. The British play a big part in this. When we got so many chances in the kind of time frame from May to September of 1997, Mr. Tenet, the director of the DCI at the time, would take every chance we got down to the White House, into their senior group on foreign policy, which could include the Secretary of State, did include the Secretary of State, the CIA director, some of the military, FBI, a number of people, either the topmost people, the head of the agency level people, their lieutenants, or someone that they designated. And Tenet used to tell us, well, the argument we had was, if we get to a point where we have a 50-50 shot at this, we should take it, because given the nature of life in Afghanistan and the ability to move quickly with trucks and things, it's better if we take a chance, and if we miss, we try again. And Tenet would say, okay, I'll do that. I'll pass that message. And now when everything was over a decade later, we found out that Tenet would always tell this committee that he worked with that it was a 50-50 chance, and but instead of saying 50-50 chance, but we better take it while we got it, he would say, well, we need another string of intelligence. And he would always say we have to get the British to do this so we can confirm our own reporting. And that was typical. Our senior people still behave in most cases as if we were colonials and that the Brits can do anything. While in Afghanistan, in my career in Afghanistan, which was about 20 years, most of the things they did in Afghanistan, we paid for. It is a strange animal that a country curries has been great power and depends on it, or trusts its word more than the word of its own officers who are risking their lives to get the information. But that's, again, another nature of this particular beast.
And let's revisit when you became situated there. That David Cohn, who was head of the CIA's director of operations, had an idea in mind, which was to create a virtual station that would fuse the intelligence disciplines into one office that would focus on a singular individual.
Yes.
In this case, it was Osama bin Laden. And he actually...
By default, I have to remind you that was by default, because they wouldn't go after Hezbollah, because they judged Hezbollah a religious organization as well as a terrorist organization, because of the leader of Hezbollah was also a ordained cleric. I don't know if they call it ordained in Islam. I can't remember, but he was a legitimate religious leader.
a caliph,
I can't remember what his name was, sir.
Hassan Nasrallah.
Nasrallah.
Yeah.
Nasrallah.
Well, yeah, and in this case, it's Osama bin Laden, and he actually selects you as the chief of station because you were currently running the CTC's Islamist extremist branch, and you were the most qualified.
Well, that's partially right, sir. I also was a former directorate of intelligence officer, an analyst, and I was the second or third or fourth choice because, first of all, the virtual station was a new animal to the agency. The second thing was it had an authority to send and receive messages without dealing with the we had an authority to send messages, whatever the other area divisions thought, whether it was NISA or Near East South Asia, whether it was Europe, Africa, whatever.
Right.
And so suddenly there's this independent, almost independent organization that didn't fit into that what would it have been then. It would have been more than 55 years of regional organization in the agency. So they approached 4 or 5 different senior directorate of operations officers, and they all turned it down. And at least I was told when they came to me, I was going to be the deputy. When they came to me, they said, well, these guys didn't want to take a chance with their career because they might end up winning the enmity of the area division chiefs if they did this. So by default, I have no doubt in my own mind that because of my experience, I was the best one to do it. But I would have not had any of those gentlemen manned up and did what was necessary, but they didn't.
So, okay, yeah, I didn't know that much. So you actually became the chief of station, and were you in charge? What were your primary duties there? And were you in charge of like recruiting people to work at this station?
I was in charge of assisting the stations that were relevant to the operation to identify targets, which the case officers on the ground would then try to approach, analyze, and I forget the terms, but to approach and eventually curry them to the point where they would give us information. One thing we solved with this kind of a station was terrorism, as it grew, became a multi-continent operation. There was stuff that the fellow in, say, in the Balkans we asked to do, but he couldn't do it without some help from people in the Middle East and maybe somebody in Europe. So we could put together that help very much more quickly than 3 different area divisions trying to work together. They also gave me authority to sign, to spend money far greater than most chiefs of stations had. So I could supply, my station could supply people and money for the operations we wanted to operate against Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. And so I had those advantages. I also had the advantages of at the peak of the station, I think I had 27 people, and 21 of them were women. And they were the smartest anti-terrorist people that you could imagine. I could never imagine it. They're experts at minutia, of making connections, of seeing how character reflects itself in actions or in words, working with, very little information and very difficult information, telephone numbers, credit card numbers, registration numbers, citizenship cards, that kind of thing. They were very, very effective. And we were able to send them to any number of places around the world where we had a station that had a target that we needed to have contact with, or at least contact with somebody who could report about it. And those women would go out there and do more often than not, much more often than not, a spectacular job. And so I had the strongest cadre of targeters that you could imagine. And of course, the agency, being not quite out of the old boys era, didn't like the fact that women were doing so well. They called them the Manson family as a derogatory, not as a humorous thing. But they showed them in more ways than one that they delivered the goods, and these big tough guys didn't do a thing but dropped the ball and cost dead American lives.
Were you hesitant working with other agencies? I know the FBI was there, NSA.
I don't want anybody in my organization, sir, that leaks material. I had FBI officers calling me from New York City and reading to me from classified information that came in from overseas that was stolen from our station, taken to the FBI and sent to their field offices. We had military people in there that were perfectly trustworthy. We had people from NSA that were spectacular, but we had goons from the FBI. They were loyal to their boss. They were loyal to their organization. They didn't give a shit about America.
And also at the same time, there was another operation from the U.S. Special Operations Command, and the Defense Intelligence Agency was Able Danger.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, there was a data mining program.
They never shared a thing with us. I never knew about it until after 9/11. And it was in the media.
Yeah, that was. I was just going to say, what were your thoughts about the another program that was going to run coincidentally aside from the Bin Laden issue station?
It was unnecessary. What did they do? Did they kill him? We would have welcomed the help of the military, but the military doesn't want to help, or didn't want to help. But an operation against Bin Laden that we knew nothing about was detrimental. If you ran into somebody, or if you persuaded somebody to take action on something that was not based on good information. Military intelligence is not as much a what do they call it? Oxymoron as it used to be, but it's still not the CIA. At least it wasn't in the late 90s.
How effective was the Bin Laden issue station in the early years?
Its task was to take down as much of Al Qaeda as we could and prepare an operation that could take him out or to capture him. In between December of 95 and when I got fired in June of 99, mission accomplished. We never had the choice of instigating the operation. If they had instigated the operation, it would have been all the tasks were accomplished, and the end task would have been accomplished, but they didn't. They watched Bin Laden blossom and Al Qaeda blossom. We captured as early as 96 photographs of Al Qaeda people in the United States training in Georgia and I think Florida to drive or to fly 747s and other big aircraft. There's no reason that 9/11 needed to happen, sir. Basically, is the answer. It would have been for the agency, had they acted as men and attacked and finished this problem, it would have been for the agency what the flag on Iwo Jima was to the United States Marine Corps. But they were cowards, moral, and I don't know about physical, but certainly moral cowards, job protective, generally speaking, not caring about Americans or not caring about even their own officers who risked their lives, their well-being to collect the information that was needed and asked for.
I know I related to you before about the penetration of Al Qaeda at this point, because, how hard was it to penetrate Al Qaeda regarding getting informants in the group. Now, we've had foreign agents like Eamon Dean. He wrote a book called Nine Lives, where he actually worked for British intelligence and became situated with Al-Qaeda, meeting even top leaders. You've had Morton Storm. You've had Egyptians and Saudis. How hard was it for the CIA to penetrate Al-Qaeda? And did they ever at all, up to this point, ever have anybody inside the group?
Throughout our career, my career, or throughout the station's career until June of '99, I think we did not have one inside. We had people close to Al-Qaeda who were reporting on people who were inside. We had the great advantage of Osama bin Laden regularly telling us what he was going to do. We had a good deal of that coming also from Ayman al-Zawahiri. Several excellent sources in Yemen, which were ours. But no, I don't think we can say that.
Because it's alleged that Ali Mohammed, who you're familiar with,
yes,
had worked at some level with the CIA and the FBI.
Well, when I was there, I couldn't rule out the FBI, but not with us.
But not with the CIA.
No. But we were well aware of Ali Mohammed because he made himself available to us through other means.
Right. Now, why did they replace you in '99? What was the reason for that?
After the 10th opportunity that they turned down, I sent an email to every senior person that I knew in that agency at the highest levels. Simultaneously, they were all listed in the address that said basically, listen, this is not a game. You are going to regret at some point giving up all of these opportunities without even trying them. And the cost will not be directly to the agency, it will be to the American people, which you have let down. Something to that effect. It's still in the electronic file somewhere. They never throw anything away. But that kind of got him a little upset.
Was Tom Wilshire a good deputy director for Bin Laden Issue Station?
Tom is one of the best men I've ever met. I was glad to have him there, but I didn't work with him for that long because this all happened very rapidly. And I had gotten in some other Dutch with they parachuted in a guy, an FBI guy who they were trying to hide from Louis Freeh at the time. He had been the one that fingered, if you remember the Atlanta Olympics, he fingered that security guard that was
Richard Jewell. Yes.
Yeah, he was a little mentally impaired or something, and this guy fingered him, and Freeh, on the advice of the reporting of this person, brought the house down on him and then let him go. So the FBI had been trying to hide him around, and they parachuted him into our organization, our station. And within a week, he had turned things upside down. The FBI doesn't treat women as the agency did. Women get coffee, women make copies, women take something from here to there. And he was treating my officers, as I described, which were 3/4 women at the time, as if they were just FBI women. And I kind of had it out I tried to do it diplomatically via a note that said, listen, if you want a briefing on what we've accomplished before your arrival, I can give it to you, or any of those women sitting out there can give it to you. They're not coffee getters. They don't do your talking points. They get Bin Laden, if anybody would be willing to do it. And so that got back to the FBI, and that caused some heartburn over there. So once I send the message to the rest of the agency after they did not exercise the 10th of their opportunities to kill or capture Bin Laden, I had pretty much was no longer necessary for them. And I wasn't. I had no more use really for being responsible for an organization that mission it was not really supported by anybody in the United States government at the senior level. I got tremendous support from within the working level people, but what they call the seventh floor in the FBI or at the CIA or any place else in Washington is where the decisions are made. And they're mostly made for political reasons, not national security reasons.
I do want to go back a little bit because this was a stickler for me, and it involved you. There was an argument between you and the Barbara McNamara, the infamous, where the NSA had monitored the phones in Yemen, the Al Qaeda communications hub in Yemen. You had a bug inside the house, and you only listening to half.
We built a machine. They wouldn't do it at all. We built a machine. A very, very excellent female officer worked with the directorate of science and technology, I think they called it at the time I was there. And they built a machine that could intercept out of Yemen. And but only what we could. We didn't have the ability anywhere near NSA.
Right.
We could grab one link, and I don't remember if it was the uplink or the downlink, but on the basis of what we had constructed, it would have been easy for a powerful organization like NSA to complete it. So we would get it, the link we got, we would download, we would capture, translate, and send it to NSA, and say, we believe this information is useful, and we think it would be more useful if you could, complete the mechanism, and so we can get both sides of the conversation. And I would always put a sentence in the lead paragraph that said, we of course realize that you want to defend the American people as much as we do. And so we await your positive response. Of course, there was never a positive response. I finally went out. I think I went out there, or I talked to her on the phone, and she kind of waved the 1947 some kind of act in my face and said, we don't have to do anything you've asked for. You're not going to get the verbatim transcripts. You're not going to get, even if we finish your machine, we'll take it over, and you're not going to get the verbatim conversations off of that. There is a very clear message, and very clearly, the big men at the agency did nothing about it. And
you were replaced by Richard Blee in '99.
Yes.
Did you find Richard Blee to be a worthy replacement, and did he run it differently than you would have ran it?
I think Rich Blee is one of the better officers I ever met. I don't know if he wanted it or not, but he was, I think, at the time, one of the director's lieutenants. And as I understood it, he did. He got an order to go there, and he did. Excuse me, sir. And I think he did a very good job. He had several more chances that they could have got bin Laden between the time I left and 9/11, and then he also was after 9/11. He demanded that I come back, and I did go back as what they called a senior advisor. But most of it, anything important that he wanted me to do, it would get squashed by either the deputy director of operations or the chief of CTC.
And so the NSA had become aware of a meeting in Malaysia, and they.
Sir, I can't talk about this part because I wasn't there.
Oh, okay, all right.
This is I can't speak with any more than observation from the outside after June 30th, 1999.
Right. All right. I understand. because I was going to talk about an incident regarding the cable that was read by Doug Miller, and he couldn't share that information with FBI, and I wanted to know
Okay,
why.
I can observe on the face of that it's a lie. No one ever asked anybody at the agency to share information. They would simply steal it. One of the guys we had there was later sent to prison for some kind of criminal activity. Was it when he was a FBI officer?
Right.
How can tell me what your question was once again, sir, please?
Just sure. The thing was that there was a cable that came in. It was about Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi's U.S. visas, and they were coming to the United States, to Los Angeles.
I've heard of that from the media. That's correct.
Right, and that this cable came in. It was read by Doug Miller, the FBI agent out of New York, and he was drafting a cable to warn Washington headquarters, but he needed the approval of Tom Wilshire. And according to the story related to me, was that the cable went to Tom Wilshire, and he told Michelle Ann Casey, an analyst there, to please hold up her Wilshire, and that this cable came back to Doug Miller, and it was not allowed to be sent because they didn't think that the next attack would be in the United States, but in Southeast Asia. But you had al-Mihdhar and al-Hazmi come to the United States, so this was the big disconnect. And then later,
I'll tell you, my perception of that is that of all the FBI guys, Doug Miller was about the best one. He was a financial expert who stayed in his lane. But he would not have been the only one to see that cable.
Right.
And his other brethren in the agency would have taken a copy and walked it over. And the other point I would make on dealing with the FBI is that the only way you could, when we started the station, they had those, they called them teletypes. They're those machines that I don't even know if you have them at the airports anymore, but they make a racket when they print off a plane list, passenger list. And then they went over to fax machines. You'd send them a fax and they say, well, we can't find where the fax is. And we couldn't send them anything on the first item I mentioned, the first tool I mentioned, because we didn't have them anymore. So at the end of right up until 9/11, we were sending things by fax machine and courier. Every day there would be several trips to the FBI, or several times a week there'd be multiple trips to the FBI to take information over there because they couldn't find it once we sent it to them. Now, Tennant, for all of his problems, I was told he offered Louis Freeh the same computer system that we had, which was, I'm no computer expert, but it always amazed me what it could do. But he didn't want it. So when the idea of a communication problem between us and them was certainly true. Louis Freeh kept them in about the 1930s, 1940s. But in terms of actual getting a hold of the material that was in our agency, in which all of their officers read, it wasn't true at all. And they fixed their communications problems not electronically, but by purloining classified information and endangering the assets that provided us that information.
Can I just jump in at that point? Because I think this is really central. I don't know about you, Adam, but I've never heard anyone give this account from this perspective before, because it really contradicts a lot of what's been put out. I'm thinking in the dramatization of the Looming Tower, the book, the dramatization of that was on Hulu or something. It's the CIA that come out looking quite bad in that. It's Alec's station that comes out looking quite bad in refusing to share the information.
if people don't like being told that we have a responsibility to the working fella in Texas as much as we do to the president of the United States. And I came from kind of a working class, blue collar family, as I said, and I never had a white collar job until I was just short of 30. And so I took it very seriously, and I still would if I was still working, but they don't. They may pay lip service to it, but they don't give a good damn about it. And in terms of, I've already described to you the criminal activity I had going in my station of people stealing classified information, which should have put them in jail. But there was nobody in the agency willing to do what they would have done to an agency person who was taking information in that manner.
It's also... Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Well, I was just going to ask, it's also a perspective we heard from National Security Coordinator Richard Clarke, isn't it? I think he was the first person that became prominent with this narrative. In about 2011, he did an interview with the two men who went on to author the book, The Watchdogs Didn't Bark, which presented this narrative and featured interviews of various people in the FBI, including Mark Rossini, who was in Alec's station at that time, presenting this narrative that the CIA, and in particular, it really falls on Tom Wilshire, blocked this information going to the FBI, and then lied to the Senate inquiry about it, saying that and including George Tenet lying to the Senate inquiry, saying that nobody had seen those emails or those messages, where it became clear that over 50 people had seen them. So this is
here's what I can say, sir, about Tom Wilshire. He was an excellent officer. He's a brilliant man. And he's not an aggressive person, though. He's not combative. He was a very good deputy. And see, for anybody to say, like, even as much as I admire and like Doug Miller, the deputy of Alec, the station, could not have stopped the FBI from getting that information, either with the approval of the agency or not, because all Doug Miller or any other FBI agent had to do was to walk about 75 feet across the hall and into another area of offices. And the deputy chief of the Counterterrorism Center was, and maybe still today is, a senior FBI officer. So if he had went and told that man his problem, it would have been solved pretty quickly, because the agency would have bent over backwards and said, oh, yeah, of course you need to see this. Do send it right away. So it all sounds to me like they made Tom Wilshire some kind of a scapegoat, and Tenet had played along with it, which is perfectly in his character.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a massive narrative, right? In that, if you ask the average American who's Tom Wilshire, they're not going to know. But certainly in the kind of around 9/11,
the rest of his life, he's going to be on the record for doing something that he probably didn't intend to be final. But certainly, the FBI had no qualms about going to their own senior person and getting anybody below that senior person overruled. It's hokey to believe that happened. It's not hokey. I should take that back. Unless you lived it, you might not believe it.
Yeah, I'd say it's become the predominant for people who are into this and reading about it. I would say would you agree, Adam? That's become the predominant narrative around Alec Station.
It actually is.
Yeah. Well, I wrote, when I found out about the what is it called? Leaning Tower, or
the Looming Tower?
Looming Tower. Yeah. It's a funny thing, because the author of it, he called me on the phone after I had resigned and was in private life. He must have called me 15 or 18, maybe 20 times, and we've discussed all of this. And his book shows no reflection of it all. His basic, solution for the problem with Islamism in that book was they should arrange it so Arab women are more licentious with men, so the men wouldn't take their frustration, sexual in nature, out by flying planes into a building. That's the quality of his analysis. But anyway, when I heard it was announced, and after I saw a couple of the sections reviewed, I wrote a letter to. It was produced, or somehow it was in the charge of something called Legendary. Legendary. Still have the documents. Legendary Productions or Entertainment or something like that. And I said, listen, well, you're producing a story that has really not very few contact points with what really happened. And I got a letter back from the head of their publicity or public relations department. And they said, well, we're doing this story and we felt we had a right to embroider some parts of it or change it for entertainment purposes. So, it follows, if you track all this stuff from their refusal to do anything, then we get attacked, then we get the negative information about the agency, they get a negative information about me, about Tom, about any number of other people. And it's in a train. It's all looked like it was set up. It makes you believe, who knows what happened on 9/11 anymore. I thought I knew, and I was obdurate in refusing to consider that anything was wrong with the idea that it was conducted by the enemy itself alone, until I saw Building 7 collapse, with no one able to explain to me at all how that happened so late in the day with no more planes hitting anything. So I'm prattling on here, but we understood, we were told when we were redacting information for the 9/11 Commission that there was something in their directive, their order from the Congress, that everything would be redacted so that within a limited number of years afterwards, it would all be released to the American people. And you can see how far that has gone.
Wouldn't this, but my problem with me is, I mean, maybe you can help me out here, was that the CIA knew that al-Midar and al-Hazmi were Al-Qaeda and that they were inside the United States. Why didn't they tell anybody about them being inside the United States?
I have no idea. Well, I think you can spin a story off your own hook about that.
Right.
But
But with me, I like to put myself separate. So I go by data processing. I don't like speculation, and I don't like to.
I exactly do too. Now, if you had been one of 28 people or 29 or 30 people who had spent 4, 5, 6 years of their lives trying to make sure that Osama bin Laden didn't attack the United States when we knew that was his major plan, his plan to bring us back into the region so he could knock us around there. Do you really think that the working guy, the guy who had been working on this for a long time, would withhold that information more than temporarily till he cleared it with someone else? I don't buy it. I wasn't there. I'm talking speculatively here.
Right.
I was on a punishment tour at the time doing narcotics.
Because there seems to be two different personalities. And Alex, you have you, and then you have Blee, and then things change along that line. And it's like I can't. It bothers me to the fact that, and I think you can understand, is that one agency would know a certain thing that could actually benefit them if they actually share that information. But then again, like what you're saying, that other agencies are stealing from you. So there's this huge.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a lot of.
It is huge.
No one trusts nobody at this point. And it really fell at the not the benefit the American people, because 9/11 did happen.
It benefited nobody.
Right.
Except the FBI.
Well, how did it benefit
they
them?
managed to put the blame on us.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Yeah.
But you can understand, Mr. Scheuer, that there would be some level of resentment regarding that there were two Al-Qaeda operatives inside the United States that the CIA knew, but the FBI didn't.
Well, if you believe that story, yes, it'd be a terrible thing. I don't believe it.
What's not?
I think I can't help but wonder why, if this was such a CIA failure, why wasn't I called to testify?
You wouldn't have called to testify not once? Closed door testimony?
One time I was, but it wasn't for the why would they choose Tom, who had been there for not a long time in CTC, but not a long time on Al-Qaeda, and instead of the guy who they want to blame for this or that or the other thing?
I don't think it was about because this didn't happen on your tenure, and I think that's the reason why you weren't called.
What happened on my tenure was that the Central Intelligence Agency's leadership, the FBI leadership, they facilitated 9/11 by not doing anything with everything within their realm of capability. That's the way I look at it, sir.
I have to ask about the comment on Building 7, because we've interviewed one of the physicists who is absolutely convinced, very intelligent fellow, absolutely convinced that there were bombs laced throughout the buildings and the Twin Towers too. And I think Adam and I have taken an agnostic stance on that, not having any physics knowledge ourselves. But of course, it does suggest a much deeper reality beyond that, in that if there's even a hint of truth in that, you then have to have operatives moving the hijackers round, and this becomes not an accident, but this highly coordinated program that with help from the inside. And I was actually, one of my final questions, just through looking through your podcast and seeing that you've interviewed people about the Kennedy assassination on there, and you've interviewed James Perloff, who's an historian that I find very interesting. I don't always agree, but I think he's got very interesting and very conspiratorial take on history. I was going to ask how your perspective on the world might have changed over the past 20 years. But to really go into that then, I suppose anyone who goes down the 9/11 was an inside job route really points at the CIA as being the people coordinating that, and the FBI are kind of the dupes. They're kind of like taken along for the ride. And what's really amazing from what I'm hearing now is you seem to be acknowledging a possibility that there was an inside operation because of Building 7 and the way it came down, but saying it's certainly not in the way people think. Don't look at Alec Station. The Alec Station was full of dedicated people who wanted to stop this. So the agents who are organizing it, they exist elsewhere. Is that a fair characterization of your position?
I think that my position is that the agency did, at the working level and at the level of our people in the field, did everything they were tasked to do in December of 1995. And completed all of the things except the one thing that I or my officers could not be responsible for, and that was ordering the elimination either by the military or by kidnapping of Osama bin Laden. That's where I am. And in terms of Building 7, I resisted forever watching these things. But when I finally did sit down and watch Building 7, I thought, good God here, how could that come down in that way when nothing hit it? Could it been heat? Could it been what? And no one's come up with an explanation yet, but I've seen several of the physicists and engineers and quorums of them speaking at conferences, on video, of course. But it's raised a question with me, but more importantly, in my own thinking, I've watched all of this stuff go on with Trump. I've watched all of the stuff now that looks like is a murderous operation conducted by people deliberately. My whole view of how the American government works is much more jaded than it was previously, more or less because of what my own experience, but it's been buttressed by 20 years of more of this nonsense. And I guess that's where I stand. If you look at my blog, I've been very clear about this on that for a long time. We have generals who can't win wars. We have border patrols that can't protect the border. We have people willing to stand up and lie about climate fraud as if it was, the gospel. When we have as many, what do they say? Nobel laureates, scientific Nobel laureates on one side as we have the other, but it's a closed question. The idea that every other week we get some kind of a command from the World Economic Forum that is treated by Biden's administration as law. Yeah, my view of, I don't think it's conspiratorial anymore. I think there's so much, and I wrote a blog just this week. There's so much, so many things that have happened that if you think they could be all could be just a coincidence, it's something. Now, I wouldn't take that yet back to the 9/11 issue, but the doubts in my mind are now much stronger than they ever have been before.
Are you familiar with Donald Canestraro?
With who?
Donald Canestraro.
I know of a Vince Canestraro.
Yeah, but no, there's a guy named Donald Canestraro. He worked for the Office of Military Commissions. And what he did was he had interviewed people from CIA and FBI. They spoke anonymously about a covert report that the CIA and Saudis were running inside the United States. Now, this is after you were gone, the Alec station, that the CIA and the Saudis were running a joint operation in monitoring al-Midar and al-Hazmi inside the United States. You talk about like conspiracy involving like World Trade Center 7, and could there have been a conspiracy running behind at the doors of the CIA that they didn't know about?
Well, certainly there's a possibility that there was something going on that I didn't know about.
Right.
You have to remember that John Brennan was the chief in Saudi Arabia for virtually the whole time that I was running Alec Station. And one of the things we asked him to do was to ask the Saudis to provide public information about bin Laden, birth certificate, wedding certificates, health records, investment records if they were available. And he kept not answering the cables. So I finally sent one that was directed to him directly and to say, we really need this information. So that he sent a message back and said, the Saudis don't like us asking this stuff, so we're not going to do this. We took that information up to the director, Tenet, and he didn't do anything about it. So I don't know what's possible in this world anymore. I only know what I saw.
Right.
And I was out of the loop, certainly until the day after 9/11, and then I came back for, I don't know, what was it? About 3 years, and then I resigned in 2004.
Regarding Saudi Arabia and the embassy and Brennan, it just ties in. I wondered if you ever experienced any tension between your aim and the aim of Alec Station at shutting down Islamic terrorism and shutting down Al-Qaeda, and a kind of geopolitical sphere where radical Islam is being used first in Afghanistan, but then across the Stan countries in Azerbaijan, and ultimately in the breakup of Yugoslavia to kind of tilt the board in a directions favorable to US foreign policy objectives. And one place where that people talk about that coming up is in the 93 bombing, and the fact that the blind sheikh, Omar Abdul Rahman, is allowed in to the United States. And again, the narrative for the people who are interested in this, the narrative comes down to that he seems to receive some level of protection. So initially when there's the assassination of Maya Kahani, it's looked at as being a kind of lone gunman thing, even though it very much isn't. So Al Said Nasser is locked up for that. But the fact that his house is full of documents from Fort Bragg provided them from Ali Mohammed is kind of covered over. And then they get this guy, Ahmed Salem, inside the cell, and the FBI counter-terrorist officer at the time, Carson Dunbar, totally inexplicably pulls him out in a way that makes no sense. And again, the narrative that is spread, it's the tentacles of the CIA are over this, and they're playing geopolitical games and sending signals down to protect this cell, either because they ultimately want these things to happen, or because the center there, the Al-Qifa Center in New York, is a recruiting ground for foreign fighters. So just to summarize my question there, it's like, did you ever experience that tension of security versus geopolitical objectives? And also, is that narrative true? Or perhaps do you think it's false, the idea that the CIA had any influence over what the FBI were doing with the terrorist cell in New York?
Well, we had zero influence on it. We probably had zero knowledge of it. The agency would send agency officers to work with the FBI who they were sure would not ruffle any feathers. And I think implicitly that they wouldn't bring back any information that would cause a problem between the two agencies. Where I stand at the moment is that I've witnessed, I would say, since 1995, and never more so than in the past 5 years, 3 years, that there doesn't seem to be very many people who give a good damn in the senior levels of this government about the American people. And the more I see of today's events makes me focus back on what I saw and what I didn't see or didn't realize or was too naive to think about. And I'm not a very really naive guy in terms of working for an intelligence service. But I don't know what to say to you. Is it possible? I'm getting to be to the point that anything is possible. Did they burn up Maui with directed energy weapons? I don't know. But it's odd that so many trees are standing around places that were burned down.
Were you aware at any point, Mr. I just want to get your thoughts. Were you aware of any point, because you're this actually happened after you left Alec Station. Between 2000 and 2001, there was a large Israeli intelligence operation inside the United States that were using moving companies and art. It was called the art student ring. It was a report by the Drug Enforcement Agency that they would have these Israeli students art students, allegedly, that they would come to the homes and businesses of the FBI, the DEA, and other government entities and sell these cheap art. And they thought that this was, they were hiding like recording devices so they can listen to the homes and businesses of these people. Were you aware of any large such Israeli operation that was conducted inside the United States? They were living nearby, the Al-Qaeda affiliates and people that were involved with 9/11.
Let me say just to start that I am an inveterate opponent of the American relationship with Israel. I think, as George Tenet said in 1949, this is a relationship that has nothing in it for us and everything in it for them. I believe they're capable of doing anything against the United States if it's in their interests. Was there reporting about activities around military installations, space installations, activities just in business? Of course there were. But it was very it's very hard to get that information, even if you're working in the agency, because they keep it confined to a very small number of people in a distant room, for example, or for logistics ability to get to the people who actually work on it. There's nothing that would surprise me if it turned out to be Israel working somehow against us. They've suborned our people to spy for them. They've given our technology to the Chinese and other people. it's just a ludicrous thing that we deal with them as if somehow they are equals or somehow even at times superior to us. I think it's a detriment to the United States. I think it's a danger to the United States. They stole the information to make their first bomb from American business and the American government, their atomic bomb. It's we might not even tolerate what they do to us from the Brits, but I don't know. Maybe the Brits and the Israelis are somehow a pair to be reckoned with. I don't know.
I know you've always have been a vocal critic of American-Israeli policy. Is it now more so pronounced than ever before?
Well, it's what I've always tried to do is to not speak of the problem being mostly on the Israeli side,
right?
And I still believe it is mostly on the American side. We can't get a quarter of the Congress interested in trying to fix the problem of 25% of America's children going to bed hungry every night. But when AIPAC holds its annual meeting, they get 500 or more senators and congressmen to attend those things. I told, I testified in Congress one time after I had left the agency about this, and they were a little upset. I said, you guys must be on the take here. What is the point of this? Why are we involved in their wars? And it is just a remarkable thing for the tiniest of tails to be wagging the biggest of dogs. And what really put it an end to it for me, and I've expanded my criticism both of Jewish Americans and of Israel, is the employment of the Anti-Defamation League and the Southern Poverty Law Center recently to gather facts on conservative Christian Americans to feed Biden's idea that conservatives, Catholics, and Christians are the enemies of the state. And they send that information to the FBI, they send it to the DOJ, they send it to the military. Now, do you think those people would be doing that if there wasn't some interest in it for Israel? I doubt it. But this is just, I'm supposed to be a Jew hater and a pro-Hitler person now. And I just look at it from the American's perspective. What in the world do we get out of that relationship? We don't get any more out of that relationship than we do out of our relationship with Ukraine. In that both of them are loser relationships for us. I don't know if I answered your question there, sir.
No. It's actually, there was another follow-up to that, but on the opposite spectrum. Currently, right now, there's a lawsuit against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in which the 9/11 victims' families, law firms like Creedler, and Motley Rice are currently working on the Saudi angle involving one particular person who was inside the United States and assisting Khalid al-Mihdhar al-Hazmi named Omar al-Bayoumi. I just wanted to get your thoughts about the lawsuit, and have you been following that story?
I have to say that I am retired from the agency, but not unemployed. So I have not followed that very much, sir.
Okay.
But I can tell you one thing, that one opportunity we had while I was chief to take Osama bin Laden, capture him, was stopped when it was briefed to Brennan securely, not in the open. But he arranged for a meeting between the director of Central Intelligence and I was on the trip. Several other people were on the trip, and we met, and no one really knew what Brennan had in mind. And he said, we're going to have a meeting with the king. The chief of the Near East division was along with us. We're going to have a meeting with the king, and they said, don't do anything against bin Laden. We'll take care of the problem quickly. And I said, listen, we've been at this a long time. You have never asked them to do a hard thing against Al Qaeda yet. I don't know if you've asked them to do anything about it yet. And all of a sudden, you poop in on the wrong precisely the wrong time from my perspective and an American perspective to shift the responsibility of protecting American citizens from Osama bin Laden to the Saudis, who, for years, he was the poster boy of what a good Saudi should be. And so I got up the next morning and I was disinvited to the meeting. So I, had coffee and waited until it was time to leave. Well, and they came back and they said, the king said, we'll have this problem solved in a couple of weeks. Don't do anything. And so they all bowed, I guess, and kissed his toes, and that's what happened. And so the next time Brennan tried to contact, the king had assigned it to his intelligence unit. And the next time he tried to contact Prince Turki after this meeting with the king, Prince Turki was the head of their intelligence. He was told that the prince was gone on vacation for the summer for 6 weeks and wouldn't be able to talk to him until he got back. And then they tried to get to his deputy and they couldn't get to him. And so we ended up with nothing from the Saudis and scrubbing an operation that at least had a 50-50 chance to work. So I'm not a big fan of the Saudis either. I'm a big fan of the United States as it was established. I'm a big fan of killing its enemies if they need to be killed. I am not, I found out eventually, very happy with being played for a fool and seeing marriages break up amongst people that worked for me because they were there 14 hours a day, or, people delaying getting operations and that kind of crap. But the Saudis have much answering to do, in my mind, without any evidence on the shelf here other than what I've told you. They have a lot of, some of them at least have a lot of explaining to do about what happened on 9/11.
Mr. Scheuer, do you think the United States investigated 9/11 properly, responsibly, out in the open? Or do you think?
I think there were some very fine investigators. I think the chairman of the thing was a professor from somewhere. And can't remember where, but I think he was a political operative. I think he was close to Clinton.
Yeah, Philip Zelikow.
Zelikow. Yeah. And some of the other participants, like he had a panel of people that he was working with. It was him and this panel, and then they would decide which direction to take the thing. I've told everything and much more that I can't tell you,
right, to
all of those people, and it's not reflected in their report. Although we kind of made an agreement amongst ourselves that if we were called to testify, not in public but in private, that we wouldn't say anything unless we could bring along documents that could support it. So when the people from my office went, from my station went, they had not only knew what they were going to say, but they also had documents that were being supplied through other channels to these people. And they were redacted, but they were showing what we were talking about, but they never paid any attention to it. Lack of imagination is what that clown, you mentioned his name earlier, he was the czar for terrorism.
Richard Clark.
Clark, yeah. Nobody ever asked him why he traveled by himself to the Emirates so often, but that's another issue, I guess. But he wrote a piece that said it was a lack of imagination that bin Laden got away with this. And I thought, you son of a gun, you're the one that was essential into destroying chances, or not doing chances, at least not taking chances to kill bin Laden or capture him before 9/11. And they all played their part perfectly afterwards. I felt like the fool of fools. It's I guess a Catholic growing up in a Catholic education makes you a little naive, and I guess that's what I am, or was. I don't think it's the case anymore.
Richard, do you have any follow-up questions?
I'm sure I could ask 100, but I just think it would, if I did, it would go on for so long. We've been here until tomorrow. So I really think this, for me, has been the most incredibly enlightening interview in terms of really, throwing what I thought I knew into disarray, and making me question everything once over. So thank you very much indeed for that, Mr. Scheuer.
Well, you're welcome, sir. If I can help, I'm always happy to. But my opinions are my own, and I very seldom change them.
What are you doing? You're right. You're retired now. What are you doing in public life? Anything? Any projects?
Nothing. Publicly, I'm just finishing a manuscript of a book called Mind Your Own, which is a history of American non-interventionism from the founders to today. And I hope to have it published early next year.
Are you working on any podcast future for yourself? You're working with Mike, right? I think.
Yeah, we do 2 or 3 shows a week, and I write a blog. I haven't done a lot of it lately because I've been tied up, but I wrote one this week, and I'll be writing more frequently in the future.
Podcast looks fascinating. I've seen Naomi Wolf has been on a few times, and Ron Paul has been on. That's incredible.
Yeah,
so, I'm going to be checking that out.
We've had some very good guests. Colonel Mike, my partner, is a whirlwind when it comes to finding people. He's very quick off the mark on stories, and I think he's done a fabulous job in finding people to talk to. I throw in one every once in a while, but only rarely. He's the drive behind this. I just got the movie star good looks, that's all.
Michael Scheuer, chief of the Bin Laden Issue Station and author of Imperial Hubris, as well as Marching Toward Hell, American and Islam After Iraq. Mr. Scheuer, thank you so very much for coming on to the show.
My pleasure, gentlemen. I'm sorry if I prattled on.
No, not at all.
So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.